The following video contains content regarding 9/11. If this offends you, please feel free to leave now.
Message number 100.
This was the moment when the city that never stops stopped for the first time, and it did not know how to become the great city it was once again. As stated by Louise Gazzanelli, a witness to the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks in New York. With that being said, to what extent has domestic and international terrorism affected the society of the United States post 9/11? American society has been impacted in the economic, security, political, social, and psychological aspects. Good morning, everyone. My name is Angela Avance.
I'm Nidhi Patel.
Maylise Reyes.
And Nisha Patel. Terrorist attacks have been deteriorating the economy of the United States by contributing to the national debt since September 11, 2001. Funding for Homeland Security has increased from $16 billion in 2001 to around $70 billion in 2012, as seen here. Not only has funding for Homeland Security increased, the intelligence community requested a total of $52.6 billion, with $16.6 billion of this money designated for counterterrorism efforts, as seen in this chart. Domestic terrorist attacks can be proven just as costly as international terrorist attacks. For example, the Virginia Tech shooting in 2007 cost the United States about $48.2 million in safety and security upgrades, cleanup, renovations, and other related costs. Acts of terrorism produce both direct and indirect costs. Direct costs are short-term and include the destruction of life and property and responses from emergency services providers. Indirect costs are more significant since they affect the economy by undermining consumer and investor confidence. Due to both domestic and international terrorism, especially after 9/11, the United States has increased spending in proper security measures to create a safer American society. Maylise will now go into more detail about the security measures that the United States has implemented.
Thank you, Nisha. After the occurrence of 9/11, new policies were made in regards to security. Airport security has increased in its thoroughness and aggressiveness since terrorism became a prevalent issue, as shown on this graph. Just 2 months after 9/11, the U.S. Congress passed the Aviation and Transportation Security Act, which led to the establishment of the Transportation Security Association, or the TSA. According to the International Foundation of Police Officers, the government replaced private security companies with the TSA in order to strengthen airport security. New changes included the presence of law enforcement and air marshals, criminal background checks on employees, screen check baggage, and pat-downs. Terrorism has also led to changes in school security. After 9/11, the National School Security and Safety Services conducted a national survey showing that 95% of school officers stated that their schools were vulnerable to terrorist attacks, as shown on this pie chart. This led to a higher demand and increasing security, which led to schools taking a variety of different measures and increasing their security. In an interview with the principal of Laguna High School, Ms. Margaret Nampon, she explains that terrorist activity has called for the enhancement of school security. She also stated that security check scans done on students the previous school year was in response to terrorist activity and campus violence on campuses in the district. Acts of terrorism have resulted in a demand for more reliable school security systems in which new drills, regulations, and innovations are created in order to protect the students and staff. After the September 11 attacks, the federal government adopted more sophisticated intelligence measures in efforts to preserve national security and combat terrorism. Angela will now analyze these measures from a policy point of view.
Thank you, Maylise. As Maylise mentioned earlier when discussing security, American citizens called for new security measures to protect themselves from future terrorist attacks. The government's policy formation of the Patriot Act was a proposed resolution to these demands of stronger security. Kelly Cusick, an attorney for the federal government, explained that the Patriot Act authorized easier access to the monitoring of citizens. These new severe security measures created an imbalance between protecting national security and respecting American civil liberties, in which legislation such as the Patriot Act became ineffective. Therefore, terrorism has resulted in the United States government taking drastic measures in the name of national security while violating American civil liberties in the process. State governments have also responded to terrorism in America by creating new policies. Terror-stricken politicians have directly targeted the Islamic community in American society by institutionalizing fear through legislation, as you can see in this image. This shapes the way Americans think about Muslims and add to their fears regarding Muslims. The sole idea that political Islamophobia is legally debated represses Muslims in American society, and when oppressive legislation passes, it gives institutionalized power in formidable hands. Nihian will now analyze terrorism-induced fear from a social perspective.
Thank you, Angela. Since the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks were perpetrated by the Islamic radical group Al-Qaeda, many Americans began generalizing the terrorists of 9/11 to all Muslims, according to Conan Eklund from the University of Michigan. As stated by Sheikh Rashid, accredited instructor of 5 Sufi orders, anti-Muslim rhetoric has grown into a large money-making industry, especially with people with political aspirations. Prior to the 9/11 attacks, there were only 20 to 30 hate crimes towards Muslims. However, after 9/11, these numbers increased more than tenfold to 500 hate crimes, which can be largely attributed to the highly anticipated anti-Muslim rhetoric being promoted by the media. Basung Chaudhry, a 3-year medical student at the Michigan State College of Osteopathic Medicine, stated that she never had difficulty acquiring retail positions due to her experience until she began wearing her hijab. Her manager began treating her differently, decreasing her hours, and eventually leading to her dismissal from work. Chaudhry reflected upon the discrimination she faced and stated that being Muslim in the face of terrorism allows Muslims to view situations with an empathetic viewpoint, and asserted that terrorism has no fate and instead lies in hatred. Chaudhry's statements reflects how discrimination and racism is prevalent throughout the work field of American society, thus demonstrating the large social impacts terrorism has had on American society. Needy will now discuss the psychological impacts terrorism has had on America.
Thank you, Naheem. The main psychological impacts bestowed upon the American public after 9/11 include discrimination towards Muslims and a drastic increase in the number of post-traumatic stress disorder victims in America. As a result of September 11th and recent domestic terrorist attacks, such as the San Bernardino shooting being conducted by radicalist groups such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS, Muslims are victims of stereotyping due to the natural process of heuristics. In the field of psychology, a heuristic is a mental shortcut that allows people to solve problems and make judgments quickly based on the things that they hear, see, and experience. By being exposed to biased information via sources such as the news or social media websites, an individual's perception can become altered and their judgment towards others can become altered as well. After terrorist attacks, Americans also began to experience mental health issues because they feel vulnerable to being attacked again. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, is a mental health condition that is prompted when a person undergoes a substantial amount of psychological stress during an event such as terrorism or war. Professors at the University of Manitoba have found that the higher amount of psychological stress has increased the odds of obtaining PTSD drastically. This is clearly seen on the board, projected on the board, as people with more exposure, New Yorkers, have a drastically higher amount of people with PTSD than people located elsewhere. This relationship exemplifies that the more a person experiences traumatic events of terror, the more likely they are to suffer from PTSD and other mental health conditions, thus greatly impacting the psychological aspect of American society.
Even though terrorism does not have a direct or permanent resolution, fixing future problems associated with international and domestic terrorism in the United States can be done through the media. The media's current focus on the issues of terrorism has sparked a chain of problems in the social, psychological, political, security, and economic aspects of American society.
Stereotyping Muslims has contributed to the installation of bigotry, racism, and hate towards those of Islamic faith, causing fear within the American public. The federal government has taken action by producing stronger security legislation and increasing expenses in security measures. A proposed resolution to rectify the impacts terrorism has had on American society can be done through a better representation of Muslims and terrorist attacks in the media.
When the media avoids antagonizing terrorism and encouraging Muslim stereotypes by misrepresenting them in the media, positive social and psychological impacts can be seen when the psychological fear and social hatred that Americans experience is reduced. With less hatred and fear, there are less demands for stronger security policies in which the government is less obligated to take drastic measures in increasing security, therefore decreasing the immense spending in security measures and counterterrorism efforts. Acts of terrorism have negatively impacted the American society in many different ways. However, it has also brought Americans together as one nation. Thank you.
If it's light noise, you can scoot up a little bit. Are they all in? We good? Okay. All right, guys, thank you. Great job. We're just getting questions. Start over here to your right and go across. You guys are so color coordinated. Here we go. Please tell me, where did you, talk about you individually, how did you grow in your research as you went through all this?
I personally grew because I knew that like terrorism really does impact people, like their families, and the people who are closely related to people who are actually involved with 9/11 and recent terrorist attacks. But from my research, such as from my research from PTSD, I discovered that people are not just like, they're not just sad about it, or just like, they're like a little bit just like they miss their family member or the person that they associate with. It's more of like a mental thing and how they're really impacted for life. And it's not just people who actually experienced 9/11, it's people, their families, or people who weren't even actually at the event. They experienced just as much terror as people who were actually at the event, even though they weren't there.
Okay, thank you. Angela, tell me what inspired you guys to pick this topic?
Well, this topic really affects a lot of people in America today because 9/11 was such an impactful event in American history. And even though this 9/11 happened over a decade ago, we still see terrorism happening in America today. Last December in California, there was a domestic terrorist attack. So we felt that this issue was a prevalent issue that we can introduce to our audience and analyze further.
Okay, thank you. What strategies did you use to collect the data that you did for this research?
So we started off by picking our question, and then we realized what certain umbrella topics related to our question, and then we split it up per person. And so we realized that the 5 main topics were economic, security, political, psychological, and social. And then individually, we did our own research on those specific topics and how they relate to terrorism, and that's how we merged it all together under the question.
Good. All right, so let me follow it up and move over to you guys. As you guys came together with different topics, did you have any issues that things didn't blend together, that was you had to force it to come together, or?
Well, it was actually kind of the contrary because, well, when we were talking about each of our research and how everything went with our research and how it connects to terrorism, we actually kind of saw connections and links between each umbrella topic we had. For example, so there's the economic impacts, which is the increase in security spending, which connects to mine, in which then the security that was being implemented also included the Patriot Act, which goes into the political perspective, which is Angela's perspective, which then went into Nahian's, which was the social, because politicians were using pretty much Muslim discrimination in a sense, like such as Donald Trump, like the ban of Muslim immigration. So that kind of connected the two together. So then you got into the social perspective with the Muslim discrimination, Islamophobia, which then went into Needy's overall fear and terror of not just Muslims, but also in fear and terror of terrorism as a whole.
Okay.
So it kind of like merged perfectly.
Sure. Cool. Thank you. Ian, I think you guys all addressed that this is a topic that is from before 9/11, but really 9/11 brought it to the forefront for us, and it has continued back to what you said, Angela, in December. What advice can you give people that talk about terrorism in the future?
Like as a research topic?
Yeah.
I would recommend to definitely look at sources that are from credible sources and research studies and things that come from the direct government, like the Homeland Security information. For example, like in the economic aspect, we used the Pew Research study because we could not find information directly from the Homeland Security, but a credible source, Pew Research Center, provided us that information. Because a lot of the sources out there are biased and they're all blogs and they're all like from a perspective of either a Muslim or a perspective of either someone who has discrimination towards those or like bigotous feelings towards those people. So you should try and find information that's definitely credible from EBSCO, which is what we all focused on. We focused on EBSCO, and definitely more primary resources and secondary resources, such as interviews with principals, interviews with people who face discrimination, or interviews with the TSA or things like that.
All right, good. Thank you guys. Great job.